Hello. Since there's no one here, I am just gonna start. For those who might be watching later, please feel free to leave any comments in the section below, and then ask any questions that you have. Or if not, then you can always also reach out to me individually. I'll do my best to answer any questions that you guys have on time as well. So I guess oh, I have to share my screen. Sorry. So. Yep, so you can see my screen. So welcome to organizational development. Um, I'm going to be your host. So my name is Ivan. I joined ISEC back in 2014. I started off as a LCVPTM in 2015, ISEC in Melbourne, then MCVPTM 16, 17 in ISEC in Thailand, and then MCVPTM OD for ISEC in Australia. Just let me double check that my microphone is working. Hello. Okay, I think my microphone's not working. What the? Hello. Okay, I think it's working now. Sorry about that. Okay, cool. So that's a little bit about me. Started my ISEC experience in 2014, as I mentioned, from ISEC in Melbourne. Just why does it say my microphone isn't working? Hello. Okay, so I don't know if it's my microphone that's not working or that when I share my screen, the microphone stops working. Let me try one last time. Okay, so I really hope, okay, so I think this is working now. Yes, I think this is working. Cool. So I'm gonna just move on. So quickly gonna go over the agenda, expectation settings, a bit of the history, 17-18 context, and then the 2018 plans and goals. So quickly gonna go over this. So expectation settings. Oh, someone has joined. Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? Hello. Can you hear me? Hello? Oh my god.
But there's no one. Yeah.
Hello.
Oh my god.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I don't know if this is not working. Can you tell me when I share my screen, does my microphone work? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can see your PPT.
But you can still hear me, right?
Yeah.
You can?
Also with your face as well.
Okay, good. I thought because like it says that I can't hear myself either.
But I think your sound is not big. You need to speak louder.
Yeah.
Or maybe you need to close your mic. Yeah.
Is this better?
Yeah, that is better.
Well, why are you joining this webinar? Anyway.
I haven't seen you talking for long, so I was just curious.
Oh my god. So
Yeah, no one joined.
For anyone who's watching this later, these are some of the expectation settings. So it's not going to be a fully comprehensive overview, just going to give you like the basics of how OD is currently in Australia. Pay more attention to what I'm saying rather than what's on the screen, because you're going to get the output later as well. So rather spend the time like taking into account what I say rather than what's on the screen. Ask as many questions. So for those who are watching later, feel free to put it in the comments, or if there's any questions here, please ask whenever. And then the last thing is just keep in mind other cultural differences. So I said this for my TM1 as well, but I think it's really relevant to OD since OD is like a big scope. There's a lot of things that you can be doing. So some of the stuff that we're doing here might be different to what you have in your entity and stuff like that. Yes, you can ask anything. Okay, so I need to close the chat now. Okay, cool. So so I'm going to quickly go over a bit of the history. So OD, actually, okay, before we go from that, so quickly go over the entity context in terms of like how many exchanges Australia has roughly done. So this, if you joined the general webinar, you would have seen Jesse present this. Obviously, this has been the growth path of ISIC in Australia over the few years with 13, 14, 508. You can see back then we did run IGV and you can see that then we dropped in 14, 15, 410 and in 15, 16 we hit our historical height and you can see there's still numbers for almost all the products there. And then last term, so 16, 17, we did drop quite a considerable amount. And 17, 18 right now, you can see that we're slowly climbing back up. So as of the August 1st to January 22, we are already on 302 exchanges. And for our focus product, which is OGV, it has grown already from last year's term. So for this, what you should notice is that as the terms went on, especially in our term, there's no more IGV. IGV has shut down in Australia at the moment. Same with IGE due to some legality problems. And right now, the MC is concentrating on really focusing our efforts on OGV and IGT. So that's some of our growth path in the past few years. And as you can see, it's been pretty up and down in terms of like growing and then dropping, growing and then dropping and then growing a bit again. So that's why I think for OD especially, it's important that we're able to have a really good OD framework so that our entity can continue to actually grow year on year rather than like how it is now fluctuating. So I'm going to quickly go over the years. So 13, 14, there was no OD responsible on the national team. There was no OD model back then. However, they did do a tiering system. And then they ended that term with 8 full members. And then in 14, 15, so that was one of the first years we had a OD responsible on the national team. They weren't MCVP OD, they were MCVP OD TM. So that's kind of how it's always been in Australia at the moment. Like even my role right now is MCVP TM OD. So the OD model was introduced in 14-15, and as you can see, there was pretty blanket strategies throughout the tiers. So what blanket strategies means is that for if you were in that tier, all the strategies were recommended to be the same thing. Transition process was improved. The coaching model wasn't based off the OD model, and then they also ended the term with 2 full members. So they changed membership. ICX was raised, and they ended this term with 2 full members. In 15-16, again, it was an MCVP, TM, and OD. The OD model was revamped and included the back office parameters. So in this year, coaching model was also tailored towards the OD and was stronger compared to the past year. So each LC had their LC coach. They also had coaching applications that they did. And there was also very specific tailored coaching towards based on what the LC needed as well. So on the OD model itself, it does there were blanket strategies, but at the same time, the MC back then, they were quite conscious of what was going on in the LC, so they knew what they needed to do there. And then they also ended the term with 2 full members, and then in that term, there was like a big EST team, and at the same time, they also tried to start doing EST tracking in terms of like EST performance and stuff like that on the national level. So last term, again, MCVP TM OD. So this term, they actually revamped the OD model a bit into, so they had very T-specific strategies for both front office and back office. They also had a coaching model based on Grow. Yeah, as I mentioned, they revamped the OD model. They had an expansions growth model and a parent LC document introduced because her role was also to do with expansions a bit. I'll talk a little bit about that later. And then they also use October National President's Meeting, so we call that OPM as a transition meeting for both the LCPs of 2016 and 2017. And they also started in this term to create a national way forward in the December conference. So what this means is basically at the December National Conference in 2016, as an entity, they created a whole 2017 plan, so 2017 year plan, which is to ensure the continuity of the strategies within the organization. So basically, for the second half of their term, they carried out the 2017 plan. And then when I came in this year, when our MC team came in, we carried out that 2017 plan for the rest of the year as well. This year, they also had EST tracking, and then they also evolved the internal communications bit by using my isaacaustralia.weebly for newsletters and also having the resource hub there. And then for this year specifically, as I mentioned in the December National Conference, so what they created actually in that 2017 way forward was that they had OD model evolution as an entity week. So back then, the entity week, actually, I can't really quite sure remember. It's on the next slide, so I will go there. So they ended this terms with 4 full members. So when I came into the start of my term, we had Isaac in USUD, Isaac in UNSW, Monash University, and Macquarie University as full members. So in this term, they did evolve a lot more, and at the same time, there were still things that were still very basic. So just to go over all the years that have been in the past, in terms of, let's say, the T-specific strategies, coaching model and stuff, we know that for a fact, like coaching was done on a very LC needs basis back then. It was like if the LCP requested it, then they would have LC coaching. And at the same time, some LCPs also didn't receive coaching if they didn't request for it either. So it wasn't very like this is something that has to be done. It was more like if you need it, it's here. And if we try to reach out and you need it, then it's also here. Same with the T-specific strategy. So if you did have access to the past OD model, you would have seen that they had Ts. They also had clustering, but the clustering was based on an average, which didn't make sense in the sense of like if a LC had T3 in their OGV and they had T5 in all their other products, then they would be in cluster 5. So that paired them up with a lot of smaller entities, and in that sense, it didn't really make sense. As I mentioned, expansions in our context right now, Isaac in Australia, we aren't really concentrating on expansion. So we're really concentrating on like the sustainability of the organization itself this year, and really trying to make sure that all our LCs right now can grow from where they are before we are actually looking at expanding again as well. So the expansions growth model and parent LC document was actually something that like we didn't really look at all this year. And yeah, so all the other things are there as just stated. So now moving on to 17-18 context. So this was what I was mentioning before. When they created the 2017 plan, this was what the entity week was. It was all LCs jump Ts in OD model parameters. Each LC experienced at least X percentage of overall exchange growth. So back then, they wanted all the LCs to jump in every single product that they were running. So when we came into our term, continuing on this 2017 plan that was created at that December National Conference, we wanted to make it more focused. So as one of our MC behaviors is focus to achieve. So we made that entity week even more specific. So we wanted all LCs to jump a T in their focus product. And a lot of the LCs, their focus product was on OGV. So at the end of the term, so far, 4 LCs have jumped a T in their focus product at the moment, and that's where it's at. So at the start of my term in 2017, there was like a bigger emphasis on OD in the first half of the term. These were the bolder things are the stuff that we did concentrate on. So there was a huge focus on the coaching model. Even though last year, as I said, they had the framework for grow, like making sure that they did coach their LCs. It was a very like if they need it, if they want it, then it will be happening. So this time we made the coaching model much more of like very set, very structured. People had weekly calls with their LCPs. We had 5 coaching visits as well, and making sure that each of the objectives are tailored towards what the LC needs during that point in time. We also revamped again the OD model this year, as I mentioned a bit, because back then the clustering didn't really make sense. Although the strategies and stuff were there, so we just revamped it and tweaked it a little bit. And now we're using a tiering model as well as a banding model. We continued on the LCP and EV transition as well. We looked at the conference cycle a bit. So the only real thing that we moved in the conference was we added a December functional conference before our national conference. I'll talk a little bit about why. And then also we moved our May president's meeting, which is upcoming, into April president's meeting rather. And in between our conference cycle, we also included our 5 coaching touch points as well. Planning was a bigger focus, and then internal campaigns was also a focus for us in the first half of the year. So the new OD model has a clear tiering and banding system based on operational health and also organizational performance. So at the very start of our term, we introduced what we call metrics that matter to really drive the entity behavior. We'll have a look at that in a bit. So it was basically trying to help the LCs focus on like the measures that really would make a difference within their LC. And making sure that they were able to not only measure but also drive it within their entity. So we had also like the clear system of coaching. Like I said, we have 5 LC coaching visit touch points proposed. One was in August, one was in November, then again in January. So we just had some LCs having coaching. In March we'll go again, and then also in May. There's also a weekly coaching call framework that we're currently using that focuses on both the LCP development and also the LC development. So we're tracking that tightly week to week, making sure that all the MC members are actually delivering upon those minimums that we're trying to do. So this not only gives the LCs like what the objective is there for in terms of LCP development and LC development, but also helps us to understand like what is going on at a local level much more regularly, so that we know how the state of the entity is at on a more regular basis. We also brought back, as I mentioned, the December functional summit. So why we brought this back was because we wanted the VPs to go to the functional summits, the elects anyway, so that they can gain all this knowledge and skills that they need to head into planning in December conference. So in December conference, it was a big planning focus, making sure that they can get ready for the start of their term. And at the same time, we wanted them to know more about their functions so that they can go into planning, knowing how they can contribute as a VP in their function on the planning. Next one, stronger emphasis on clear, detailed, and centralized planning. So when we came into our term, not all LCs had a very clear plan. Not all LCs even had a plan. And some of them didn't really know like their GVA. So they didn't have like weekly breakdowns of their goals or anything like that. So we really wanted to make sure when we went into planning this year that not only do they have a plan which they use for the rest of the year, but they also have that broken down into weeks. Their goal is very clear, and we also have a centralized place where we can actually see all of their plans right now and track them based on that. Yeah, and as I mentioned, we brought President's meeting forward. In this past December National Conference, we saw 2 LCs actually disband. And this was mainly due to just the sheer, I guess, exchange. Like one was talent sustainability. They just didn't have anyone there to actually run the LC. And the other one was just purely due to the exchange. Like they've been an initiative group for quite a while, and then they still didn't meet the membership status. So the plenary made the decision to disband them. So right now, ASIC in Australia, we have 11 LCs. Why you see 8 out of 13 LCs growing in their focus product was because before the 2 LCs disbanded, 8 out of 13 LCs actually were growing in their focus product. Cool. So this is what our tiering and our banding model currently looks like. It takes into account the organizational health index at the bottom and our overall exchange performance at the moment as well. So this was our latest one when we did it for December. Obviously, January hasn't finished. So you can see the standings there. UNSW is our highest performing LC right now with that amount of exchange. And you can see all the other LCs are quite around like band 2, some are in band 4. And this is mainly like our huge emphasis is not that we're bad at our organizational health. So we're really trying to just make sure that our LCs have the capacity to increase their exchange performance. And so when we were talking about the organizational health, this is what we base it on. Our organizational health is based on exchange performance, talent capacity, and also financial strength. So these are the measures that we actually look at for each LC. So revenue from exchange, budget execution, LC profitability, percentage of members achieving their goals. So this has been changed since the start of my term to reflect the global TM MOS, as well as also changing the percentage of IXP to just reintegration as sending members as more of OGV focus as well. So exchange performance, we measure process time, conversion rates, and also standards delivery. So this is how we calculate this organizational health index at the bottom. Cool. So for the rest of 2018, the focus right now is we recently I got OD EST. So before in 2017, I didn't have any EST at all. So one reason why we brought this in was not only to make sure that the entity has like a better understanding of OD in general, but also to free like more capacity so that I also have things, other things that I can be focusing on. We're going to continue solidifying the coaching model with more emphasis on the evaluation and effectiveness. So right now we have a very good framework in terms of how coaching actually done, what are the sort of things that should be covered, but in terms of how much of the objectives and stuff did it hit, how much of a difference did it make, there's still yet to be things that we're currently measuring. So for the rest of the term, also LC's understanding of OD implementation, monthly reporting and analysis of LC's GBA growth recommendations based on OD model, emphasis on replanning and LCP learning and development. So I think to put into context why these things are there for the rest of my term is because I think right now OD in Australia, I would still say it's at it's not at its most mature stage yet. And at the same time, for those who are also watching or listening later, is that my role actually, I would say, only encompasses of like kind of like half of OD or like, yeah, something like that in the sense of like a lot of other normal OD responsibilities in terms of MCVP ODs. Some of those are taken on by the whole MC team, like rather than just me, myself. So in the sense of the real focus is to make sure, one, that the understanding of OD in the entity overall is there, and two, also to make sure that the coaching model and also the evaluation, so like the reporting is there for the LCs. Because one thing that we recognize that from the past years like 16, 17, 15, 16, for example, is that whilst there's an OD framework there and a structure there, it wasn't like the most, like it wasn't the easiest thing for us to actually assess the effectiveness of it, or also like how LCs actually implemented, simply because the LCs, for example, didn't know how to use the OD model, or didn't take advantage of like the touch points that they had. In terms of like conference cycles and stuff like that, those would have had an impact. But in terms of like the more touch points where we work with the LCs, how they're integrating the OD model and stuff into what they're doing, those actually come with more understanding of how they can actually grow together. So that's why in 2018, there's a big focus on actually implementing a lot of what we have in the OD model for it to be effective, as well as the LC's understanding on where they specifically need to focus on and also how to grow. So replanning is another thing. Our entity currently, I wouldn't say we're terrible at it. At the same time, I wouldn't say we're the best at it. So even when I said one of our concentrations in December was in planning, a lot of like what we realized is that there still needs to be a lot of capacitation on how to effectively do planning, how to make sure that they do it according to timelines, setting their goals, how do they split their goals up, break down that across the years, and how do they come up with the effective strategies and timelines for that to happen? How do they make sure the back office aligns with front office operations, for example, stuff like that. So there's also going to be a bigger emphasis on replanning, and also LCP learning and development is something that we're doing as a team in the MC to make sure that month by month we're actually providing the topics that the LCPs need to know in order to best deliver their role. Yeah, so that's for rest of 2018. Yeah, are there any questions? I don't know if anyone's there. June, you're there. Do you have any questions?
From the presentation, you've mentioned that there were essays were disbanded in the term. So what was the procedure of 2 essays were disbanded, right?
Yeah.
But like, how was, from OD perspective, like how did you actually go through that process to,
Um, so disbanding actually is more, it comes from our compendium. So I wouldn't like, how do I say it? Like one one of our LCs which disbanded, there simply wasn't pipeline there. Like the LCP resigned, and then there was no one there to actually step up, take the role, and make sure it continues. So that's why that LC was disbanded. And at the same time, like I mentioned, the other LC, according to compendium, they need to become a official expansion within, I think, 3 years of their initiative group or 2 years, and they didn't meet that requirement either. So under our compendium, they are like they come up for automatic disbandment, and then the full members vote whether or not they want to pass or keep, like whether they want to pass or not pass the motion. And then in the plenary, basically, that's how they decided. Like the full members just voted that the LC should disband. Yeah. Any other questions? No questions?
Wait. Now, another question would be, how did you actually manage the allocation of LC coach to the LC?
Okay, so manage MC allocation to LC. So for me, when I first came into my term, obviously I hardly knew any of the LCPs. I also some of my teammates I hadn't worked with a lot, especially the international. So what I did, I think there was kind of like we kind of looked at it from three perspectives. One perspective was like we did tests with everyone in terms of MC and LCs. We got them to do like the MBTI test. We got them to do like the Enneagram test and stuff like that to map out their personality. We also set the LCP's surveys in terms of like what they look for in the coach, what they want to continue, what they think their LC needs to improve in right now in terms of their LC situation and stuff like that. And then we also, the third perspective the other perspective we took was from the current MC team back then, and they gave us perspective into like their own LC reports of like what this LC is specifically struggling on, for example, and also like how they're performing. And then also the LC coaches back then also gave their perspective on their own LCP as well. So that was the second part. And then the last part was just like, more of like talking with Jesse, because as I mentioned back then, was like I didn't also know like the complete profiles of the people on my team. So after we got all those things together, we just made the best choice in terms of who we thought was best suited to an LCP based on like personality, as well as based on what the LCP wanted/needed, and also based on what the current say like this LC situation needs in terms of like operational profile or like back office profile and stuff like that.
Adding up to that question, just one last question about LC coaching. So when after people are allocated to be LC coach for specific LCs,
Yeah.
did LC coach provide exactly same coaching content, or was it tailored by each LC coach by their own?
Okay, so for our coaching model right now, what we have is that what I do every month is like, as I mentioned, we propose the 5 coaching visits towards the LCs, and they pass that in the budget. So for each touch point, like in August, in November, in January, March, May, as MCOD responsible, I do create the objectives for each of the touch points. I create like a sample agenda, what sort of sessions should be delivered upon those. So as MC, we come into the coaching with like specific objectives that we want to achieve, right? And then based on that, then the coachee, the coach and the LCP, like the coachee, they'll have a conversation of because we don't want it to just make it like this is what MC says you need, then you need it. Then how we also tailor it is also ask the LC like what else do they think they are struggling with right now in the LC, and what else would they like to see in coaching, and then they tailor the agenda upon that. So in terms of each MC does go into coaching with a clear objective of what we want to achieve based on like the where the touch point or the timeline is, and then they tailor it with their own coachee in terms of what more they want. So in terms of the sessions, most sessions every LC does receive unless they say that they need something else. And at the same time, that's also what I do. So let's say, for example, in this past coaching visit in January, like some of the objectives that we had was to do plan reviews, to do talk about recruitment, to talk about leadership versus management, so that they know what the difference between leadership and management is, so that they can get ready for the start of their term. So like these were some of the objectives, for example, that I set for January. And then based off those objectives, I have like a list of sessions that people should do. I also come up with a sample agenda of 3 days. And then the coach will take this sample agenda and the objectives, talk with the LCPs, see how it will fit when they will do it, and if they also need anything additional as well. And there's also like the sessions itself is also standardized in the way where I create like the skeleton, and then we just tailor it upon the LCs based on their numbers, based on their plans and stuff like that.
Cool.
Oh, any other questions? No questions? Okay, if not, I'm going to stop the recording there. If anyone has any questions and they watch, please feel free to reach out to me and ask me. If not, good luck for the rest of the process. Yeah, thank you for watching if you did. How do I, no, wait, hang on. How do I stop this recording?